Welcome, everyone. This is our 8th Agile seminar on attendance, and I'm so pleased today to be joined by Paul James, who is CEO of River Learning Trust. And one of the things that River Learning Trust does really well is codify their leadership practice, because they recognize the power of effective leaders in their schools, and they want to capture the most influential and effective aspects of what they've learned. And they've developed what they call core principles documents that set out key principles along with specific practice underpinning those principles. And these are evolving documents, and Paul will talk about how they're actually in the process of updating them right now, but these are routinely updated with new learning. And as part of these principles, they encourage leaders to create a culture of community, connectedness, and belonging, which we know is central to encouraging our pupils back into school. Now, Paul has kindly joined us today to discuss some of his trust's work in this area. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all this morning. Let me share my slides. So I've been Chief Exec of the River Learning Trust sort of since it began. So I was one of those chief executives that started as the head teacher of one of the schools, and then we've grown from sort of 2 schools as it was at the time to being the 28 schools that we are now. So what I will do in the sort of half an hour or so is the plan of presentation is give a bit of a brief introduction to us as a trust, set the context. I'll talk, as Sam was saying, about our core principles and about a little bit about how we use them. Then flipping that through, of course, into attendance, how we as a trust are responding and have been responding to the attendance crisis, and then how that has led us to both drafting some core principles specifically for leaders on building cultures of connectedness and belonging, and trying to codify that, but recognizing that the way in which they're implemented within schools will be different for each of our schools. So in terms of us as a trust, 28 schools, mix of, if you like, of sponsored and converters, largely based in Oxfordshire, 2 schools in Swindon, teaching school hub, including a skit. So we are really diverse in that context, which I think is probably also important to understand. So we have some really big secondary schools and some quite small rural primary schools in amongst that mix. And you can see there on that slide a huge range in terms of the communities that we serve, and also in terms of the levels of SEND we have. We have a number of schools with SEND resource spaces within them. So how are we doing? We have a pretty good track record. 3 of all those schools that joined us in RI are inadequate. 3 are still RI. And I'm sorry to say they are the 3 schools which serve our 3 most deprived communities. Improvement often taking a bit longer in those contexts, but very ambitious for them. But also noting post-pandemic, actually, our primary outcomes are a bit more spiky in comparison to our secondary. So we're not perfect. And I don't think anyone is, and that's really important attitudinally in terms of our openness to sort of learning and trying to work out what will work best in what context. So currently, again, our attendance across the trust is broadly improving in comparison to last year. That's where it kind of sits at the moment, and again is pretty spiky across our diverse range of schools. So what's our sort of underpinning principles? We're a multi-academy trust, so trying to help our schools be better quicker than they might be if they were standalone. This notion of children, young people only generally getting one go, which is why our work is so important. And we have 3 core principles. That commitment to excellence, which actually is really about continuous improvement, everyone learning because of our own adults learning as much as those for our children and young people, and respectful relationships. If anything is sort of underpinning this principle of connectedness and belonging, it is about the importance of humanity and relationships, which is always, if you like, been at the center of the work that we do. Schools, trusts, they are all about people and relationships. So we work in an aligned autonomy kind of way. We're lots of decision making, in a sense, at school level, but influenced then by leadership in the centre, in terms of we have support and challenge partners, do what they say on the tin in terms of working with our school and directors of education. And part of that work is then developing core principles to kind of articulate what we think is working well across the system, be our own or the national one. So a couple of things that are really important for us and why this sort of sits in this context is this sense of all-round education is really important. I think there's a number of things I'll say this morning where you'll sort of think, yes, that's obvious. That's why we do what we do. And I make no apologies for that. And I think sometimes it's good to be reminded of the core purpose of the work that we do with children and young people, that it is more than about outcomes, of course. Yes, they matter. But there's a whole other raft of experiences, interactions and learning that children and young people have in schools that enable them to be successful in life. And that is at the heart of our work in society, I think. A really deep commitment to inclusion. If I were having my life again as a trust leader, I would have appointed a director of inclusion earlier than I did. We've had one for a few years, but I wish we'd had one earlier. The impact of that in terms of raising sort of levels of expertise across our system, really important and being really powerful for us. The diagram on the right-hand side, people, processes and culture, sort of a simple summary of high-performing organisations, we think. Right people, well-motivated, well-trained, in the right roles, supported by clarity of process, but really importantly, underpinned by or wrapped around almost by a healthy organisational culture, which is, of course, the work that leaders do and set, and I'll come back to that. Okay, so core principles. What are our core principles documents? We have about 11 of them at the moment across a range of topics, some phase specifics, sort of a specific around, right, these are the core principles. It's kind of best bets of writing in primary schools or early years learning or leadership. As I mentioned earlier, they are based on what we've learned. We always tag in there the research or the reading that we've done that's built in, and we have conversations sort of within and beyond the trust to establish them. We never present them as incontestable fact or truth, because I think that's a dangerous thing to do often, and we want leaders to engage with them sort of intellectually, thoughtfully, to test them in their own settings. And we recognise that context matters. So we don't present a core principle and say, right, everyone does this now. It is more a sense of, right, these are the best bets, but they are a point at which you are able to go, okay, so if what you are doing in this area isn't working as well as it might, here's our starting point. Which is we found to be a really useful approach in terms of that sense of leaders still having authorship and ownership for the work that they do within their schools. So a couple that have been around for a couple of years, we're really happy to share stuff, but I was saying to Sam, we're actually in the process of reviewing things at the moment. I'll talk about that right at the end. So if you did want that, you may waste a few months as we tidy some things up, as we're thinking about the sort of revisiting again the implementation of these principles. So a couple of examples before I come back to attendance and connectedness and belonging. Excuse me. So 6 core principles for leadership. So the importance of self-awareness, awareness of others, the importance of really high quality conversation. So pretty much all of our senior leaders within the trust will have some dedicated professional learning opportunities with a professional, with a particular sort of framework and exploration around leadership and conversation. I've mentioned already the importance of clarity. We've really influenced by sort of Patrick Lencioni and some of his writing. Again, both the advantage around healthy organisational culture, which I think rams home the point of organisational clarity, as well as his other work and the importance of trust in building healthy teams. So, and then some work on change management. In terms of behaviour and attitudes, so leading this area of school, I think these well, almost a precursor as well to some of the work that we're now doing on connectedness and belonging, because there's lots of overlap. So this sense about, okay, so how do we lead this culture of ambition belonging? So this is something we were sort of developing a couple of years ago, and now it's really come to the fore, of course, in the context of post-pandemic and attendance issues. The importance of explicitly teaching children and young people the behaviours that we think are important within society, within schools, for that sense of socialisation. And again, recognising the context for your school within that is more important to do that in a particular way in some schools than it is others, and that's fine. But know your school, know your community, of course. And throughout our core principles, a really important point is the attention given to vulnerable pupils, so disadvantaged pupils and the pupils with SEND. So each of the core principles is then sort of has a few bullet points under each, giving a bit more detail as to what that looks like. It doesn't go into implementation in terms of the implementation tools for then doing that. So what tends to happen, the core principles are provided to leaders, they're discussed with support and challenge partners, and then schools will prioritise which of these areas, because you can't work on all of it at once, which of these areas to work on, and then we support them, and they'll do the work on implementation to make the improvements where they feel it's necessary. But it gives the framework and context for doing that work. So I'm now going to go through a little bit on attendance, what we're doing briefly, and then this sense of connectedness and belonging, how we lead that culture. So what have we done? I imagine the same things that everyone else has done and is doing, and the fact that you're in this room now or watching this at a later date. We've made the most of the learning that has been made available to us and to us within the system, been really useful. We've had some visits to our schools, we've gone and visited some other schools, we've obviously used the DFE CST materials, we've provided mini conferences for our own leaders, we provided training for our leaders, we've done that, I didn't put on the list here, but we've done the kind of auditing stuff within across the trust, and had groups, particularly groups of schools that are struggling with the same issues within their communities, spending time together as leaders to kind of work through what may be the next steps. Where are we seeing most impact? It is where schools have probably stopped doing one thing or stopped spending money in one place so that they've increased capacity to do this work, recognizing that that really matters, the line by line knowledge of the barriers facing children and young people, getting to know families. In some cases, it was about improving, tightening up systems and processes, and thinking about the quality of the communication, that sense of ease of understanding of letters, the tone of those, the way in which you're seeking to build relationships with parents rather than not. And generally the sense of being all over it, the attendance figures all over the wall. I was at one of our schools recently, and we're standing there with a head looking at that, and that's fascinating. Why is it that year 10 has gone 91% here, 94% here, and then 89% here, and and seeing the patterns over time, and then but not in year 8 or whatever it may be. And one of the things that led to some really good student voice work with those students, with just an open arm of, just tell us, why were you here on Tuesday but not here on Friday or not here on Thursday? Please talk to us. There's no sanctions here. It's just help us to understand what the barriers are. So some of this work then led us to then thinking about the culture of connectedness and belonging. And I think one of the reasons why I'm particularly optimistic about this work is because lots of it, not all of it, is free, but in a sense lots of it is, because lots of it is about human interactions in schools and what we also say and do as leaders. So I think it's being optimistic about this is work we can do and we do day in and day out. So no sense of I'm a tragic optimist, that sense of I recognize the challenges within the system, but I'm absolutely optimistic that we can make a difference for so many of our children and young people. So what do we mean then by connectedness and belonging? So a couple of definitions here to give us that sense of understanding. I always use the value of micro interactions. It's the difference between you know, when you if you're a driver and you let someone go past you, you know, you wait behind the parked car and they go past you. The moment of human connection where they look at you and say thank you, it's like, thanks very much. The little bit of human warmth and connection that you get through that, in comparison to how does it feel if they just drive past, don't do anything, or a bit grumpy. And sometimes we lose sight of the thousands of micro interactions that enable connection within schools every day, with staff, with our children and young people. And then belonging is much more this sense, obviously, in terms of the extent to how pupils, how they feel within school. And that does matter. There is lots and lots of research that illustrates that sense of, we've done a lot of work in recent years, haven't we, around cognitive science, understanding the learning process. There's also something around sort of affective neuroscience, a sense of understanding how emotion also affects learning. We remember what we feel. You know, you think of some of those most memorable things in your life and so on and so forth, or even your most memorable things at school. So we ignore all of our knowledge about humanity at our peril, of course. So what did we do? We've done a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, some research. If you didn't know where to start, the one at the top left, of course, I would imagine lots of you have already read it, or at least aware of it. But Reconnect is really, really helpful, doing lots of raising lots of the issues that I think we've then drawn down into our core principles, or our draft core principles for connectedness and belonging. But some of the other research, then putting it in the UK context rather than the USA context, which is where Reconnect in a sense is set. So, for example, the most recent Good Childhood Report and the decline in children's mental health and happiness, you know, just how they feel and why and so on. So lots of research out there, which is what we've then been basing our work on. You know, we've had input from, really enjoy the work from you know, Peps McRae, some of his motivation work, Mark Rowland around disadvantage, obviously in terms of mentally healthy schools, lots of EEF stuff. So there is lots of stuff out there. And this is almost one of the things about what we feel is one of the important things that we can do centrally is to try and help shape some of that. And then some of our leaders will just go, that's fine. And others, our leaders will go, I want to read this stuff. It's like, great, go for it. But you don't have to necessarily do that to be able to implement some of these really important things. So these are, if you like, the reason I put ... is because we think all the ... is because each of these promote connectedness and belonging, we think. So if you like, these are our current draft principles for leading cultures of connectedness and belonging. So this sense of everyone understanding the importance. It's your principle, you know, your Simon Sinek, you know, your what is your why, or your Kotter's theory of change, creating urgency. It's like, if people don't understand why this matters, it will be another fad. I don't know if how many colleagues in the room remember personal learning and thinking skills, or whatever it may be. But there are various things which have come and gone, and it's a bit like understanding that this work is grounded in who we are as human beings. You know, and that's who we are and who we will be. So then, once you understand it as a leader, and then share that with those that then you're also seeking to influence in terms of behaviours, which actually is both pupils, pupils as well as your sort of colleagues, but thinking about doing that in, you know, what sort of way will you be doing that? We're then into, okay, so how do we develop the workings of our school having the lens of building connectedness and belonging? And hence these 5 other areas that I'm going to sort of whiz through in 10 minutes. Okay, so understanding the importance, these are, if you like, sort of 8 areas. I'll let you have a quick scan down. If we think sort of the eight key points that we're sort of pulling out at the moment. that are relevant from the research that links in this area. I think the one thing that I wanted to draw attention to, and certainly talking to some colleagues working in adolescent sort of mental health and taking an academic interest in this area, is the impact of smartphones, social media, and bullying, and the extent of the way in which bullying is just so can be so destroying for children and young people, and the extent to which we as schools, if we're not thinking about bullying and anti-bullying differently now to the way we were 5 years ago, we probably missed something. So again, just thinking through these are sort of really key issues, we think. Okay, so then into the different areas. So when you're thinking about school values, that overall approach of the school, it's like, how do school values communicate this sense of, and then how they're used. We're thinking about curriculum design, which may be different pathways. It may be opportunities for a diverse range of, if you like, things that sit outside necessarily the academic curriculum as part of the intentional curriculum for our children and young people. Anyway, I'll let you scan those, and then I've just, what I've tried to do, but I'm at risk of running out of time. Here's a couple of, here's a couple of examples. So, on the right-hand side, the values from one of our schools, big one in red there, we know our students. So they're hanging much of this work on with their colleagues on, this is what we do here, and then thinking about the context for how they do it. We have another school who, part of this, because of the clear connection between aerobic exercise and mental health, is thinking about the extent, particularly at secondary school level, and Key Stage 4, the extent to which PE is being a bit squeezed out potentially, and actually what is the impact of that in terms of obesity, activity, mental health. And other schools considering, I know some trusts do, I think we're thinking about it, and I think some trusts do it really effectively, the sense of a charter of, by the time a child leaves this school, everyone should access this, and we've certainly got a couple of primary schools looking at that. So next one, classrooms. So inside the classroom, how do you have classrooms that promote connectedness and belonging? Again, please scan those while I talk through. I think there's definitely been a sense, to a degree, in some schools in education, not in our own trust, in others that I've visited, I think sometimes that there's a risk that classrooms become transactional. This sense of, I have my process as a teacher, I do my process, you do your bit, and we kind of go. And it, we're not, I don't think any of us would really think that's how you get the best out of children and young people, but absolutely understanding the importance of having clarity and having structure, and particularly for colleagues coming new into the profession. I'm not advocating at all this sense of, hey, sink and swim, just do it on the power of your personality. Absolutely not. And you need some structure, but we therefore need to think about how we're doing that in a way that enables a sense of a bit of humanity as well within the classroom. So a couple of our schools, some of the things that they're doing is, you walk around your school when you're doing your learning walks or so on, and you pay particular attention. You just walk in a classroom and go, who is this lesson not working for? Because you might see great explanation, great modeling, really clear questioning, and you're looking there and you're going, yeah, and you're really not with us, and trying to understand why. You've got another school who's looking at teacher motivation as a basis for forming, building conversation and relationships with pupils, because it's recognizing that some colleagues are really motivated by the love of their subject. Some love the fun and interaction of the classroom. Others love success. They want to get great results from their kids. All of those are absolutely sort of relevant and fine. And therefore, it's how can you use that motivation to have the conversations with your children, your classes, to enroll them in your motivation and the work that's going on, rather than thinking, right, everyone now has to have this type of conversation, which of course normally doesn't work, because teachers are different human beings themselves. And other schools, which I think is, as I said, lots of commonality work across the system, are thinking really, really hard about how well they welcome children and young people back into school after periods of absence, and how you can help them to be successful. Being successful in the classroom is so, so, so important. Life outside of the classroom, you know, how do the values live, the micro interactions, the quality of conversations, really, really good extracurricular activities. I think it's interesting research that came out early last week about, you know, trying to embed, if you make extracurricular activities compulsory, you get better sort of outcomes, as it were, through it. And that's certainly, we have a couple of our schools at the moment. Whether it will be more, we shall see, who sort of have elective type programs within the school day. So the weekly extracurricular activities that kind of do that. I think it's a really good point in Reconnect, the book, which makes the point of you are often better off running a slightly smaller number of extracurricular activities and making sure they are brilliant, and therefore there's enough pupils in them to give the social connection to make them enjoyable, rather than having loads where you have like three, four turn up and they go, not sure this is much fun, sort of thing. The environment, you know, toilets, they matter. You know, what's it like in schools? Using student voice. I mentioned earlier about that school that's thinking really carefully about listening to pupils as to why they're absent. And another school who literally was like, oh, we just need to have more fun. You know, it's a bit, we're really tight and we're really good, and they were, absolutely, but it's a bit like, I just need to have a bit more fun, and have been thinking quite carefully as to how they do that. Engaging with parents and carers, we know, is absolutely key, no matter what the government might have announced today, and so on and so forth. I get drawn into that. Actually, we know that the relationships we form with our parents and carers are fundamentally important to overcoming some of those barriers to attendance, and to just how children and young people feel and their parents feel connected to the school, are bought into it, build trust, particularly those parents where their children have special educational needs and disabilities. Given all the challenges in the sector, they're really important to work so hard with those as best we can. Also make the point about complaints is again, just kind of being really open. Let me listen, not being defensive, to build relationships over time. You know, good communication, using external agencies to deliver parent sort of learning together programs on school, the coffee morning, you know, all of the stuff that I think happens. But as I say, some of this, lots of schools are doing, and it might just be a helpful reminder, I hope. Then working with external partners, and this is the sense of being civic anchors as well as trusts and schools, how we can work with agencies to help make things better, both for our children, young people and their families, but also for wider the societies in which we're all growing up in. And that's where you have to be judicious, I think, in terms of which of the partners you invest time with, but it is worth doing that to see things through, either in terms of at school level, whether it's a particular voluntary sector organisation, as well as all the statutory bodies, working with them to support your children, or whether it's wider networks to bring about greater opportunities for your children. So as an example, one of the fairly early conversation at the moment with integrated care boards locally, in terms of the alignment of sort of health priorities, and how, as an education system, we have access to lots of children and their families, and therefore how can we work in a more joined up way, rather than them running their campaigns and doing their things and us doing their thing. And it's a bit like, okay, how do we talk together? And you also have this notion, I borrow the phrase from the Reach Foundation of cradle to career, this sense of which is lots of that work, but also depending on where your schools and trusts sit, you may find that the NHS is a massive local employer, and therefore thinking carefully about how that might provide opportunities for children and young people. But that's the other thing that I would say around this area of engagement, is also thinking about career opportunities and so on for young people. So what next? We're finalising our core principles, including some of the, and then probably separately, some of the examples that we're putting together. The implementation tools, I said, I think when we first designed core principles, lots of our heads have been heads for quite a long time. Personnel change over time, so we're just refreshing those and thinking about how we support schools in implementation, support our schools, and just continuing to develop and learn as a trust, I think, as we go. But without doubt, we think this is really important work that we can do. People, human beings, are at the centre of our work, and we should embrace that, I think.